For years, I have told people a story about my dad from a time when he was young and thought he had been contacted or abducted by aliens. I remember telling this story to my friends all the way back to elementary school, and I was proud of the fact that he had a real alien story that had actually happened. I knew the details so well that I could recite it any time, which I still can, and I'll start this by giving you the same story. When my dad was growing up, he had some kind of treehouse in his backyard that he would play in all the time. It wasn't high off the ground like most tree houses, and I always guessed it was next to the tree rather than in it because he says the ladder to get inside was short and only had a few rungs. In his description, you could climb the ladder, then pull yourself up through an opening in the floor to get into the upper room. One evening in the summer, he had been in this treehouse with a friend. At some point, his friend had to go home, but my dad stayed in the treehouse by himself until after it got dark. There was also a window in one of the walls, which was just an open cutout, but he says he saw a halo of light out of this window, and it was moving toward him through the trees. This halo was soft and white and seemed as big and as wide as the treehouse itself. He didn't know what it was, and he remembers sticking his head out the window to watch it. It was going slowly and came down from around the height of the treetops to just above the ground in the back part of their next-door neighbor's property. And when it got that low, the ring of light either disappeared or turned off and he couldn't see it anymore. This wasn't at all scary to him, it was incredible, and he wanted to climb down and go to the fence to see what it was. Then he heard this talking and laughing that sounded like other kids playing in the trees and around the bottom of the treehouse. I guess this sound had a little bit of an echo to it too, like reverb. It also wasn't threatening in any way, it just sounded like fun. After hearing this, he went to the opening where the ladder was and held the sides to climb down. Then when he looked down the ladder toward the ground, there was a small alien-looking being standing at the bottom staring right back up at him. The strangest part was that he didn't feel any fear, he only felt like this was a new friend waiting for him to climb down, and that's what he did. When he got to the bottom of the ladder, he was face to face with it and could see it clearly, though I don't remember any specific details about it other than it was about the same size as him and undeniably not human. After that, he only remembers walking with it toward the neighbor's fence. Then he has a few vague snippets of being in a room with more of these beings, and from what I can remember, it sounded similar to a playroom or a preschool meant for kids. There were also larger adult-sized beings walking past this room, but he felt like they were only there to keep an eye on things like parents might do. Then he found himself sitting on the grass under the treehouse again near the bottom of the ladder, and that was the end of it. That's his full story, and I believed every word of it. It wasn't just something cool I would tell my friends either. It was something I really thought about a lot. I wondered what it must have been like to have an encounter like that, and as I got older, I wanted to know what had actually happened to him. The whole thing fascinated me. Then when I hit college, something happened that completely flipped this story upside down. I was at my friend's apartment with 5 other guys. Everyone was drinking, even though we were all about a year underage, and somehow we got onto scary stories. A couple of the guys who were there grew up hunting and talked about creepy screeching and howling sounds they had heard in the woods at night. Another guy had a story about running into some crazy and armed survivalist at a remote fishing spot that could have ended badly, and after him I ended up telling my dad's story. When I finished telling mine, one of the guys there was really interested in what I had said. He was pretty heavily into aliens and UFO research, and he started asking me questions about it. He really wanted to know if my dad had experienced a loss of time during his encounter, and he also wanted specifics about dates and locations. I told him I'd ask my dad about it the next time I talked to him, and that's exactly what happened. Just a few days later, I did talk to my dad, and I honestly couldn't remember the last time I'd asked him about his story. It was probably way back when I was only 10 or 11 years old. The first part of our call was just saying hi. Then I asked if we could run through his UFO story again and told him about my friend being so interested in what had happened to him. There was this long, silent pause on the phone. Then he just said, "What are you talking about?" I repeated myself and specifically said the UFO story when you thought you were abducted by alien beings as a kid. It was like he had no idea what I was saying and told me nothing like that had ever happened to him. That turned into him laughing at the fact that I'd even asked a question like that. I really thought he was purposely messing around, and we went back and forth about it while I brought up the treehouse and the halo and the small beings he saw. At one point, he cut me off, saying he never had a treehouse because where he lived at that age barely had a backyard. This phone call almost turned into a real argument because I was so sure he was denying it. I would have bet my life savings this story came from him. Then he asked if I was confusing the treehouse with a play structure he'd built for me in the backyard of our first house, which was a place I only barely remember living in. That single sentence stopped me from taking a breath, and I mean that literally. I couldn't breathe for a second because I instantaneously remembered the play structure he was talking about. It was vague, but I could still picture it. It was a DIY version of one of those wooden play sets you can buy at places like Costco, and it had this little room on top with a window. He had also cut an opening in the floor and added a short wooden ladder so I could climb up into it. As I went over these little details with my dad, it really came back clearly. He said I used to love the thing and played in it all the time until I started school. Then he ended up taking it apart and it went to the dump. It was unbelievable when this all came together. The treehouse structure wasn't from his childhood, it was from mine, and this story I had been telling for 2 decades about my dad's alien abduction was actually something that happened to me. I don't know how to fully explain this twisted level of realization and what it felt like, but it was a total paradigm shift for me. I don't know how it happened, but somewhere along the line when I was young, my mind made it about him for some reason. Once I remembered the play structure, there was no doubt. I was remembering my own memories. I couldn't tell you when I started telling this as my dad's story, but now I wonder if it was some kind of defense mechanism. I genuinely and with everything in me believed it was a true story that he had told me. It blows my mind to think this was my experience all along. What makes it even harder for me to deal with is that I can't remember anything more than what I've always described. No additional memories or insights have ever come to me. It's still the same exact story. The only difference now is that it belongs to me, and I wish more than anything that I could figure out what actually happened. I had one of the weirdest experiences with my stepdad Mike when I was younger. Mike came into my life about a year after my parents split up, and unlike a lot of stepdads, he was an awesome guy from day one. He's never tried to be some kind of father figure and replace my dad, and he really felt more like an uncle or something. He's always gotten along fine with my real dad too. Mike has been heavily into motorcycles his entire life, dirt bikes especially, and for my 11th birthday he got me my first bike. It was an older Yamaha YZ80, and I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Between 11 and 12 years old, he taught me how to ride and how to take care of the thing myself, and really put a love for riding in me that I still have today. One weekend when I was 12, he took me out to meet up with one of his friends and his friend's son to ride at a place that had single-track trails everywhere. We spent most of the day there and only stopped to fill up our tanks and have a short lunch, so I remember being beat by that evening. When the sun was going down, we went back to the trucks and ended up getting there so late it was hard to see while we were loading the trailer. His friend left before we did, and I remember helping him tie the bikes down in the dark. As soon as we left that parking area, we were driving down this gravel road, and one of the tie-down straps on Mike's bike either came loose or broke, so his bike started hitting the side of the trailer and making this loud noise. He stopped the truck and went back to fix it with this big flashlight while I stayed inside. That only took him a few minutes, but then he got back in and tried to start the engine and it did nothing. I remember him saying that it was the starter. Then he grabbed a crescent wrench out of the glove box, opened the hood, and told me to turn the key when he gave me the word. I heard him out there beating on it with the wrench. Then he yelled to me and the truck fired right up. In my memory, it seems like the second I heard the engine turn over, I saw this bright blue and purple light start to shine through the bottom crack of the open hood. I stuck my head out the window and saw that it was coming from over a small hill in the road right in front of us. I remember this light clearly because of the color, and it was shimmering and changing. If I had been older at the time, I would have said it looked like a nightclub on the other side of the hill. It just had those deep blue and purple colors like neon or black lights. Back then, I thought it was another car coming, but I also knew it didn't look anything like headlights. Then the hood slammed down and Mike came around to the driver's window where I was sitting. He was looking at it too and said he was going over to see what it was. He turned his flashlight on and told me to stay in the truck. Then as he walked away, he said he would only go to the top of the hill and I'd be able to see him the whole time. He promised this while looking me right in the eyes. I watched him walk up the road, and right as he was getting to the top of the hill, something so weird happened with his shadow. It's difficult to explain and could have been a trick of the light hitting him from the front and the back, but the shadow of his body wasn't on the ground, it was above him, like a vertical shadow right above his head. I could see the shadows of his legs and it looked like they were standing right on his real shoulders, then the rest of his shadow kept stretching up into the dark. It was a very weird detail that I've always remembered. When he got to the top of the hill, he stopped and stared down the other side for a minute and wasn't using his flashlight. Then he started walking again and went out of sight down the other side. I sat there in the truck with the engine running and the headlights on and waited. I wasn't really scared being there alone, maybe just a little uneasy because he did say I'd be able to see him the whole time, but I just thought another car had gotten stuck or needed help and he was dealing with it. I can only guess about this, but I had to have sat there for at least 20 minutes. I know it was long enough that I was leaning against the door with my feet up on the seat and playing with things in the cab like untying and retying this strap on his seat cover. Then, while I wasn't even paying attention anymore, the light over the hill went out, which made it get darker in the truck. I sat up in the seat again and finally saw Mike walking back over the hill and toward the truck. What I remember most about this is that his face was dead serious with no expression, and he wasn't carrying his flashlight anymore. He came to the door, so I moved over to let him in. Then he just put the truck in gear and started driving. I remember asking him what happened, and the only thing he said to me was that another car had gotten stuck and needed help. Those were the only words out of his mouth. He didn't say anything to me after that. What was so odd about this is that we drove over the hill within seconds of leaving, and on the other side there was no other car sitting there. And I never saw anyone driving away in the distance either, which I should have easily been able to see because it's pretty open out there. I'm also positive that no other vehicles came over the hill in our direction while I'd been waiting in the truck. This was just a normal gravel road, so I couldn't have missed a car coming, and I also couldn't understand how anyone could get stuck on that dry, maintained road. Right after we got past the hill, Mike turned the radio on and we didn't talk the whole ride home. Something was way off and it was so not like him. The only thing I could think of was that he was mad about something but not saying why. We got home just fine and got our bikes put away with Mike barely saying 2 words to me, but then he stayed distant for weeks after this. He was the same way with my mom and even his older son from his past marriage who was around 18 then. I don't want to say he was angry because he wasn't being mean to any of us. He was just way away from his normal personality. He and my mom even had a short argument about the way he was acting one night, so I know everyone else noticed it. Whatever was going on with him slowly wore off and he did come back to normal, but it was the one and only time I've ever seen him get like that. Since I was a kid when it happened though, I pretty much let it all go and forgot about it. 4 or 5 years after this, we took another trip back to that same spot to ride again, and neither one of us had been out there since it happened. This time I was older and riding a newer 125, and I also had one of my friends with me, so there were 3 of us. When we drove over that same hill, it reminded me of the last time, and I said something to Mike about stopping there and helping someone get their car out. Right away, he corrected me and said I had it mixed up with another place where we did help pull someone out of the mud. I fully knew what he was talking about, but that was a totally separate trip. I tried telling him about the other details like the starter going out and the bright light we saw on the other side of the hill, and he swore up and down that it never happened. He still believes this same thing right now. He has no memory of it at all. What's crazy to me is that he remembers meeting his friend and all of us riding out there that day, but he thinks we just drove home afterward. I cannot convince him that any of the other stuff happened, and it's bothered me forever. Years after this, when I was 20-something, it came up again while I was at their house for dinner and we were grilling and eating out on the back deck. It was Mike, my mom, and me, and I ended up getting so frustrated that I dragged my mom into the conversation because I knew she'd remember those weeks when he acted so weird. She not only remembered it, but backed me up about how it was the only time any of us had ever seen him like that. Mike just sat there politely apologizing, but it didn't change the fact that he had no memory of it. Then my mom brought something up that I never knew about. I guess during those few weeks when he'd been so distant, he had also been having nightmares and was getting out of bed and walking around. My mom said he would walk over to their closet that had these two big sliding doors, then open one of them and stand there talking nonsense like he was upset. She would wake him up every time and get him back to bed, but her exact words were, "It was disturbing." Mike still claims that none of this happened, and he doesn't even remember getting out of the truck to smack the solenoid of the starter so he could get it going. I don't get it because I know it happened as positively as I know my own name. Something happened to him when he walked off, and I don't know what it was, but whatever was on the other side of that hill was not a car that needed help. It was something that changed him into a completely different person. I'm glad it was only temporary and the Mike we all know came back, but that doesn't answer any of the questions I still have. I'm from Kearney, Nebraska, and when I was growing up, our house was in a pretty rural area with a ton of farms and fields around us. My parents' house was on a paved road, but there was a gravel shortcut I used to take all the time to get into town faster. That gravel road went by a huge pasture with cows and an old barn that sat back in the field, and there was a 3-strand fence running all the way along the road. When I was 19, I was still living at home, but my girlfriend at the time lived in town with her sister. I would stay the night at their house a lot, and in the mornings I'd get up really early so I could drive back home to shower and change before work. I guess I wasn't quite ready to be out of the nest yet, so I was doing this a few times a week. One morning in early June, I left my girlfriend's house at 5:45. It was just starting to get light out. I turned onto that gravel road to cut over to my parents' house and was about halfway down when I saw something in the field that I've never seen before. It was a completely calm morning, but there was a big circle of wind moving in the grass that had to be 50 or 60 feet across, and it looked like the grass inside the circle was being pushed over in a swirl pattern. It was exactly like if a dust devil had been sitting there because the rest of the field around the circle was totally still. I slowed way down to watch it because it was so crazy looking, and I could see that it wasn't moving across the field. It was just staying in the same spot but making all of the grass blow over inside of it. As I pulled up right next to where it was, there were about a dozen cows standing around in that part of the field, and all of them were completely still. This was especially abnormal because there wasn't even a single one grazing or walking or even moving. Their heads were all the way up and their eyes were open, but they all looked frozen in the field. I had to see what was going on, so I stopped and shut off my truck. I walked over to the fence, and the first thing I noticed was the sound of the grass blowing in that one spot. There wasn't an ounce of wind coming from anywhere else. It was only that one spot in the grass. Then my curiosity kicked in, and I slipped between the top and middle wire and went into the field. I walked straight up to the closest cow and actually put my hand in front of its eyes, and it didn't even blink. I couldn't see it breathing either, so I actually put my hand on its side, and it was warm like normal, but the thing didn't move a muscle. I felt like I was in some kind of scary movie all of a sudden because the whole scene was so eerie. I didn't walk over to any of the other cows, but there were 2 more standing together about 20 feet away from the first one, and it was the same thing. Their eyes were open, but neither of them were moving. As I started to walk back to the fence, I physically hit that first cow with my arm, and it had no response at all. That gave me the worst nervous feeling. It wasn't just one animal acting like that, it was every one of them, and I could not understand what was going on. When I got through the fence, I remember looking back at the grass, and it was still moving around, but it was going a lot slower, and I could see the grass starting to lift back up. Then this wave of almost hot air came across the field and hit me head on, and it had to be 20 or 30 degrees warmer than the ambient temperature outside. At the same time this happened, the view I had of the barn was behind where the circle was, and it looked wavy and distorted like when heat comes off of hot pavement. I could swear I was actually seeing the heat wave that had hit me, if that makes any sense. I felt glued to the fence while I watched the grass lift back up, and I don't know why, but I had a feeling that something was about to happen. It was like an anticipation. Then I heard a loud moo from that cow that had been close to the fence. It was jerking its head around and making all kinds of noises, and it was so sudden, like it had just snapped back into consciousness. This made me do a little sprint back to my truck, and while I was driving away, I could see that a couple of the other cows were also starting to move around, and the whole field had gone back to being still. None of the grass was swirling around anymore. It was such a bizarre experience that I was driving home like a zombie, and I even turned the wrong way when I hit the paved road, which is nuts since I could drive that route blindfolded. When I got to my house, I could hear my mom awake and in her bathroom, but the rest of the house was still dark. I skipped taking a shower that morning and got dressed for work, but my hands were shaking the whole time I was getting ready. I think it was because it had been so shocking. I also kept this to myself, even though I thought about it all day. It was only 2 or 3 days after this when I drove down that road again, but it was on a weekend and in the middle of the day. For the second time in a row, I had to stop at the pasture because right where that grass had been blowing around in a circle, there was a big dead spot. It was a clearly defined, very large patch of dead brown grass all by itself, and you could easily see it from the road. It looked like the whole thing had been precisely sprayed with chemicals and died. This experience still boggles my mind, and I've even had dreams about it where I'll be back in the field with cows around me that are frozen in place. I think it really left an impression on me. There's one other part to what I saw too, but I didn't find out about it until a long time after it happened. I was back at home helping my dad, and I don't know why I had always kept the story to myself, but I finally told him what had happened while we were working. To my complete surprise, he knew exactly which property I was talking about because there had been rumors floating around through the other neighbors about the big circle of dead grass like it was a crop circle. Like I said, you couldn't miss it from the road, and apparently a lot of other people around us had noticed it too. My dad said he had talked to the guy living directly across from the field on the other side of the road, and according to him, the owner of that pasture had found several of his cows dead around the same time. He didn't have any other information about how they died or what had happened, but I had never heard that part before. I have never been able to figure out what it was that I walked into that morning, and I've never seen cows or any other animals behave like that in my life. I really think there was something in or above the grass that was making it move in a perfect circle like that. I just couldn't see it, and it had to be what was affecting the animals. The thing that I really don't like to think about, though, is that I walked right through the middle of it. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.